On the one hand side, you have present reality, and on the other hand side, you have the future potential, our visions for the future. Problem is, if you're only connected with present reality, that's where you get depressed, you get cynical, you think we can never change anything, we're doomed anyway, you go into this dark place. And if you're only connected to the vision, you are like in La La Land. You are not connected to reality at all. You're like spaced out over there in your dream world that doesn't correspond to what most people are experiencing. So we're change workers, people who want to make change, leaders, they stand firmly between those two. And that's called the creative tension. The creative tension between where we are and where we want to go, or where we know where we could go. If I feel that stretch or that tension within me, that is where change happens. If I stay focused on going step by step, the best that I can, at every point in time, and I stay in this creative tension, that is one of the absolutely best recipes for change that I've ever come across, like a guiding principle.
Nora, I'm very excited to have you on the Core Impact podcast. I know that you help people to discover their purpose. So I'm curious to know, what is your own purpose?
I think purpose evolves over time, right? It's definitely a cyclical process. I find that we plant seeds and then we take care of them. We see what grows. We hopefully harvest the fruit of our labor. And then from that, we plant seeds again. At this point in time, I think the core focus that I have, my purpose, is to support people who would like to contribute to meaningful, profound change. So I call them systems change leaders or aspiring systems change leaders, but there's many different terms we can use. And what I'm really committed to is to help these people, first of all, find their own unique contribution, right? Like where am I best positioned in the field to really make a difference? But then also to develop strategies that really address root causes, to be more sustained in their efforts, better resourced, right? And hopefully avoid burning out or having to abandon the field entirely. So that's what I'm mostly focused on at this point in time.
Nora, there is another thing that I'm curious to know from you. How would you describe yourself? Can you tell me who you are without telling me any title? So not without mentioning the country, the age, the gender, or job title. Who are you?
I am a human being that cares. I'm a human being that has felt since childhood a lot of empathy for other people. I grew up in a context where I didn't speak the language. Like I moved within my own country and I didn't speak the language. And I think that instilled in me since a very early age an understanding that other people have a completely different inner world within them that I am not privy to, right? And so I think that set into me this energy of bridge building, wanting to connect, wanting to understand since a very, very young age. I was also always very curious. I was a child that was always asking, but why are we doing things this way? It made me a little bit unpopular with teachers or peers at some points in time. I had a very strong feeling for justice ever since I was a kid. When we were taught that, boys could do this, girls couldn't do that, or whatever, like I would always be like, but why? Like, how come this is what we're being taught? And as an adult, as this kind of curious, justice-oriented child grew, I would say, yeah, I'm someone who cares and tries to act on that care, tries as much as possible to make a difference, as much as possible to align my own actions with my values, which is hard when we live in broken systems, right? That are based on paradigms that I wish to not support. And I am also, I would say, creative or a creator. I'm someone who builds things. I see a challenge, I see a problem, or I see a potential, and I will jump in, right? I will go in and I will just try things out and see, couldn't we do this? Couldn't we try? Wouldn't it be worth it if we at least gave this a shot? So I think I'm also someone who has a strong feeling for the potential that's here. And kind of I don't know if the guts or the naivete or whatever to just think like, couldn't we potentially do it if we tried? Is that too abstract or?
It's be abstract. I fall into this trap, by the way. I don't know what you think about it, but when I connect with others, because I'm so excited about so many ideas and theories and things that change my mind. When I talk to others, sometimes I forget myself that I'm talking about theories, but I forget that many people don't understand it if you don't explain how did it affect you, and tell them story. I was like this, I am like this now. Talk about transformational stories. Yeah, you tell me, what do you think about this?
Absolutely. I think people can relate, right, much more to emotional realities than we can to facts or figures or theories.
Mm.
And for some people, it's enough to, hear about an idea and their life is transformed, or like they see a documentary about, I don't know, what happens behind closed doors in slaughterhouses or deforestation and or a genocide, and they're like, wow, I care, and now I will change, right, my behavior, or I will become active. But for many people, like we are so entrenched in the way things are, right? We have a very big bias towards like inaction, towards just staying where we are and trying to keep things the same. And I think it's part of our brain trying to control like the unknown that is life, right? And the complexity that is all around us, to be like, okay, if I just try my best to keep everything the same. So it's an impulse that I think I can understand and relate to, but unfortunately, life is change, life is movement, right? Life is alive, and it's it's not the most productive thing I think we can do, or not the most satisfying, perhaps, way to live a life. So I definitely agree with you that if we want to reach people where they're at, we do need to take that step of really taking ownership of what it is that I am sharing and why am I sharing it, and what did it do to me, or right, like share that deeper emotional truth that comes with it, that comes with that transformation. It can be hard sometimes, it can be vulnerable, right? Especially if we're like from a like representing a group also that maybe tends to get ridiculed. Like I was often perceived as this like young idealistic woman, I'm like over
Yeah.
30 now, so maybe it's like starting to become less a problem, but like for a long time I was 17, 18, 21, whatever, right? And it was easy for stakeholders to dismiss me, kind of like they would dismiss a Greta, right? Like, oh, an angry little girl, Trump has written about her, right? So a little bit that energy. So sometimes it can be scary to really stand up with the emotional reality, for example, of saying, hey, this is not okay, right? Knowing that we might be dismissed. Or equally scary, hey, I think we can do better. This is my vision for the future. Because we also live in a society where like the idealists and the dreamers and the visionaries quickly get shut down, unless they're the capitalist kind of visionaries and dreamers. So yeah, it can be scary, but I think it's definitely worth it.
Mm. Nora, I have another question about the purpose before we go to the system change. Is how can you help people when they discover their purpose to live their purpose while keep having financial stability?
That's such an excellent question, and something that I encounter a lot as a big obstacle, because indeed under extractive capitalism, under the patriarchy, under colonialism, like the system will reward those who work for it the most, right? So the name
Mm.
of the game is money, so the people who generate the most money for the system will be rewarded also with the most money, right? So this is why we see completely overpaid people in the financial industry, etc., and completely underpaid people in roles that are actually system critical, right? And we saw it in Corona, like who was allowed and actually required to go to work. It was the people who take care of our food, who sell us the food, right? Who make sure that the trash and the recycling is picked up, like the nurses, the doctors, like these are the people who are actually critical for our survival. Um, and yet they are the least rewarded financially, right? They are the least paid very, very often. And so that is a bias that is inherent in this system. And it's really unfortunate, right? And I know that unfortunately the industries that overpay just get a lot of our talent. But I do see more and more people kind of just question, right? Like have some kind of moral compass and inner sense of values that tells them, is this really aligned with who I want to be and the kind of world I would like to build? And if I dig a little deeper behind the shiny paycheck, like who is this actually stolen from, right? If I think about the value chain, say of, a computer, like which child now has an illness, a lung illness, because of what he breathed in or what she breathed in the mine, etc. So I think when people develop more of a presence rather than just chasing a fancy paycheck, and an actual awareness. And when we get back into relation, because I think the key problem is that we are so disconnected. We are so disconnected from ourselves. We are so disconnected from others, from nature, right? And we receive all these social conditionings that this is so, right? That you are separate from others. You should focus on you, on your success, and you're separate from nature, right? Which is just a biological lie, right? If we think about the oxygen we breathe and the food we need, etc. And you are also separate from yourself because you're not allowed to discover who you really are and what you really want. You're set on this trajectory. You're told this is what it means to be a man. And by the way, this is the religion you have to practice and behave like this, don't behave like that. And then chase the 5 cars and the big house and the whatever, and you will be happy. And what gives me hope at this point in time is that in addition to like the moral backbone, the compass, the clarity, and this kind of reorientation to connection and empathy that had many people question these choices and resist the lure of these like high-paying industries, is also that we are coming to a point in time where these stories that we were told are completely breaking down, right? Like, I don't think anyone that is of sane mind and has done some reading believes in trickle-down economics anymore. Really, you know, if you look
Could
at
you
the
please
facts and the
expand this
data.
a bit?
Trickle-down economics? Yeah, so
Yeah.
trickle-down economics is when we were told that we should let a class of, at the time it was, you know, multimillionaires, and then at some point it was billionaires. Now we're talking trillionaires, right? So that alone shows the failure of the concept. But we were told that it is good if some boss makes, you know, $1 and you make a penny because the boss creates the jobs, and eventually that wealth that is created at this higher level of the social classes will trickle down, right? Like the image is often of like a champagne tower. And if you pour the first glass, once the first glass is full, it will like fill the other glasses. And the reality is that when the first glass was full, it didn't start giving to the other glasses. It just became a bigger and bigger glass, right? Like suddenly we're talking like, oh, you can be a billionaire, you can be a multi-billionaire, you can potentially even be a trillionaire, and you can have houses all over the world, and you can have bunkers for when the world that you destroyed inevitably burns down, your family will have a place to go, and you can have 16 yachts and whatever, right? So this completely ridiculous inequity that most of our brains can actually not comprehend. And we kind of need an image, like a visual image often, to like try to grasp the size of it, right? And for example, I've seen people on social media, they do like with little grains of rice. So they're like, here's 1 million. And then they're like 1 trillion or like a billion would be this much, right? And you can just imagine like the quantities of rice. Anyway, so that maybe helps. Or like, if you, I don't know, I saw this calculation once, I don't remember the exact, like, you know, the data of it, but it was like, if you worked since the start of our calendar, since year 0, and you earned this much every day, et cetera, you still wouldn't have 1 billion, right? So like, to become a billionaire or even a trillionaire, now we're talking, like inherently, like something is broken in our system. But anyway, so the story we were told is that this is okay, right? Like we should let some people get very, very rich because it will then benefit all of society and it will elevate all of us. And instead, what we're seeing is that not just that inequity keeps rising, but environmental destruction keeps accelerating, mostly at the hand of the 1% globally, right? The completely disproportionately causing global warming, etc. And yeah, so all of those stories are breaking down, but also the personal story, because we were also told if you just work hard and get a good job, you will be able to have a house, etc. And I don't know how it is in your context, but in Switzerland, that is mostly not true anymore for most people. You can work very hard, you can have a good job, and you can still not afford a house. Like you may be able to afford a house like very far away from the city where you work, but if you actually want to work in a city like Zurich or Geneva or whatever, which are just the cities we happen to have in this country, right? Like I didn't choose to be born here. Affording a house in these places would be a tremendous, tremendous challenge without inheritance. So the actual story of it, like that this will work out for you in this way if you follow our script, is also breaking down. And when we look at how happy people are, we also see that it's breaking down, right? We were told like, oh, if you just consume the next thing, if you just get the next pay rise, like you will be happy. And science on happiness is showing that after a certain amount, and I believe it's much lower than we expect, it's like around a year or 100K a year or something, like it completely caps out. Like additional income doesn't increase your level of happiness. And we know that what makes happiness, of course, your basic needs to be met, right? But what makes happiness is also like your community, your relationships, how much meaning you find in your life, right? And if you've just sold your soul to a corporate empire, like I don't believe there's a lot of meaning to be found in that, because as soon as you dig, you're faced with horrible shadows. Etc. Right? So connection to nature, how creative you get to be. So there's so many things that make our real happiness that are not the paycheck. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer of a lot of context to say, yes, there is a huge inequality. And if you do choose to go into change work, into making a difference, you will have a pay cut. But my key message is that like the people who, in my experience, the people who pursue just a paycheck don't end up being happy people anyway, right? So there is a huge, I think, shift of values, of morals, of ethics, but there is also a shift in understanding that actually what makes a good life? And do I want to be chasing this pipe dream, right, that we were sold, even though I can kind of tell that it's not really leading to the outcome that we were promised?
While you are listening to the Core Impact podcast, please take a moment to pause and share with me. How do you feel? Are you enjoying the conversation, feeling inspired, or something else? I would love to know your feelings in the comments. See, Nora, I'm already curious to know so many things. I already have a list of questions, but just with your last answer, I had so many new questions in my mind that I'm curious to know from you about. I'm gonna start with one because that happened last week. One of my friends, he is someone that I know that he trusts me, and otherwise he would not have asked me this. He has a very high position in a big company, and like a decision he makes, he even told me, I'm taking a decision soon, and this decision affect 100 families. And he said, I'm thinking, and I cannot tell him you are wrong, you should do this and this, otherwise we will not have this relationship, he will not trust me. I'm really thinking how to put myself in his shoes. He said, I have to make a decision that will affect 100 families, and if I take it, it will affect them, but it will maximize the shareholder value, and this is what I'm here to do. So they will get much more profit from it. And at the same time, if I don't do it, it's gonna affect my position. And in this case, I'm not maximizing the shareholder value. And he said, whether you studied in finance, my job, the first thing is to maximize the shareholder values, value, and then I mean, anything else is like comes second as a priority. So he asked me, and I'm not gonna tell you now what I answered him because it was a long answer, but I struggled with answering it, and I'm really curious to see your perspective on it. If you have a friend like this, and she or he come to you and tell you this, what would you tell them?
Mm-hmm. I think I would say you already know. Like deep down, you already know. What is the answer that's really actually already on your heart? Because a person who's been socialized in such a way, right, who's been trained to think that shareholder value is like the highest good and that this is what this is all about and what this person should focus on, who's really made it in that system, right? You said this person has a high position in a company. Usually there should be no doubt, right? There's like, oh yeah, of course, I'll just do what the thing is that I was told to do and just, shut my mouth and do the thing. And for this person to be questioning and to seek a conversation and to say, like, that shows that they are having a cognitive dissonance, right? They're I don't know if they're beginning to realize that something is wrong or if it's been going on for a while, but clearly in this situation, like the narrative, the script that they were given, this like linear track that they'd been on for years or decades, suddenly is questioned, right? Because something doesn't feel right. Like deep down, this person can tell that it would not be a good decision. It would be ethically wrong, right? Like otherwise that person wouldn't even blink at making this decision. So I think I would probably give it back to them and ask them you already know, and potentially ask, like to give this person the space to deeper explore what is bothering them about it, right? To say, for example, like, like, why is this a question for you? What is it that you're thinking? How are you imagining that these people will be impacted? Okay, I understand. Yeah, and that kind of challenges your value of, maybe you know this person has a value of something, right, that they're realizing is being challenged. So just kind of give them the space to explore and express what's actually already there, because nobody likes to be told what to do, right? But by holding this question and coming to you, I think this person has already shown that the seed of change is there. And if I was a friend to this person, I would find, like, how can I water that seed? How can I hold space for this person's questioning, which is a part of this transformative process, right? But yeah, it's hard. And then if, practical questions after that emerge, so if actually the decision begins to be kind of cemented, like, actually, I really think this is wrong, but they're still having questions around, like, okay, what does this mean for my position? And will I, get the criticism? Like, what is the actual fallout? Because I also find that often we are overly cautious, right? Like, for example, you often hear these studies that, like, in many organizational contexts, if you just play it safe and you do what you were always told, like, you get rewarded for that. But if you are innovative, right, if you have a great idea, which could have a very positive payoff, even for the company, hypothetically, or it could fail, because that's what innovation is, right? You sometimes need to take a chance on things. You don't get rewarded very highly if it works out, and you get punished very strongly if it doesn't. So in many contexts, that completely discourages innovation, right? But we also then, like, develop this culture. I think this is very prevalent in public administration, for example, right? Or in these kinds of contexts, whereby then we are suddenly all, like, really trying to, like, be so careful. And there is such a fear, like, what if something happens to me? And often I think, we tend to put too much weight on the potential fallout or the potential consequences, because what is it really? Is it a hard conversation with a boss? Well, what if the reckoning, like the inner transformation that you had, you could also kindle it with your boss, because you point out the consequences, right? Hypothetically. And even if, worst case, you have to leave this company and you have to, like, start over in another field, or, right, like, find another job, would that really be the end of the world? Really? Like, often when we leave a context because it's not aligned anymore, because we've outgrown it, we've realized it's not right, that's a new chapter. That's progress. That's not a setback, right? So I think as soon as you start to question, again, this linear narrative of just go into this company, or, like, rise this corporate ladder, like that whole, spiel, and you're like, actually, life doesn't work like this. This is a myth. And you kind of discover that there are so many opportunities, and you can be so much happier, and you could find another job where maybe you're paid a little less, but you spend more time with your kids. And who cares about, like, 10% change in your income if you were earning super much? Most likely, if you were wise with your finances, you don't need that money. Anyway, so, right, so depending on where the person is at, you can kind of then start to think it through practically. But yeah, I would say the core thing is to ask questions and support them and mirror back to them that you can tell that they're already having an inner clarity that ethically this is not right.
I like what you said also, that nobody likes to be told what to do. And the other thing is, people feel directly if I'm judging them. Like, this is the biggest challenge. He is my friend. It doesn't matter what he does. And if I don't take him as really close friend, it doesn't matter which position he has, what is he doing, he is coming to me. My duty is to see him as a human being. And this is what you were talking about, this connection. I think this part of connection, like connecting with others. We talk about system change. By the way, let's talk about system change and start slowly, step by step. How do you define it?
Yeah, let's segue into that. And I think it's such a great point, because maybe before I explain what system change is, like, to me, also when I speak before about, like, how, like, the myth of trickle-down economics and the inequality, etc., like, what I'm describing is a system, right? And in doing so, like, to me, that still allows me to have a lot of empathy for people within that system. Now, I do believe there are few people who I don't know if they're just evil, but they certainly know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it very consciously. Like, those people exist, right? But they're far fewer than we think in general, in my experience. Most people are just following the path that they were given, right? Like, most people have received conditioning, have received socialization, and are just doing the best they can with what they've got, right? And until the fish is out of the water, so to speak, right? Until there is a change in the environment, or there's an opportunity to learn about what has been hidden from them, purposefully so, right? Where they were told, no, don't look there, or right, it was just never mentioned, or history was rewritten so they wouldn't question certain things, right? All of those things. So until there's an opening to learn more and to reconnect actually to yourself, to your instinct, to your ethics, to what you know is right, to your sense of meaning, etc., I very often wouldn't meet such a person with judgment, right? I would meet them with empathy. And in a way, there's almost a part of me that is sad for people who have been for decades on this track, and then at some point they realize, and people call that a midlife crisis or whatever, or later in life now these days because we live longer. But when you suddenly realize that you spend so much time trying to achieve something that when you scrutinize it a bit further isn't actually worth it for you, that or maybe you achieved it even and you realize it wasn't that great, or you're like, wow, I spent so much time stressing myself out. I didn't see my kids grow up, right? I didn't have any hobbies. I lost all my friends. I was just obsessed with this thing I was told I should be obsessed with. And now I'm realizing that right? They always say no one on their deathbed says, oh, I wish I worked more. Right? They regret other things. So yeah, so that's, to me, my heart aches for those people, right? And it's hard to have a conscious awakening, and it's hard to face the world the way that it is, and it's hard potentially in some cases to make a living in activism or in change work or in something that is really, really meaningful to you, or a social enterprise, right? You're really running successfully. It's even hard to do change within a big company, right? So potential roles that have meaning and purpose to you. I'm not saying go for it, this will be easy peasy, but it will be real. It will be true, right? And if you've awoken and if you've been in contact with it, then you can actually pursue the thing that means something to you. And I think that's what we're here for, to live a good life, and not in the sense of a life of luxury, but in the sense of a life that has meaning, that really is yours. Anyway, so that to say that my criticism is, with the system that keeps us blind and unable to navigate these things in a way that is really true to us. And then, of course, we have our own responsibility within that too, right? But my focus is on the system. So what is systems change? Systems change, to me, refers to when we look at the challenge, a social, an environmental challenge, any type of problem in the world, right? Something that is unjust, exploitative, etc. Very often we have a collective tendency to go in and do something that is effectively fighting the symptom. So a very simple example of this is people are hungry in my city, let me distribute food. Or there's plastic in the ocean, let me do a beach cleanup. Let me remove the plastic from the ocean. And don't get me wrong, those things are great, right? So I'm not saying don't do those things. I'm saying collectively, can we acknowledge that as long as we keep putting more and more plastic in the ocean, just doing our best to remove it is not going to solve the problem, obviously, right? At the root. Same for hunger. There's a reason why people are hungry. The hunger isn't the reason. The hunger itself isn't the cause. There is another cause. Is that cause a social policy that's failing? Is that cause, right, a rise of living costs? What is the cause? And can we work on the cause rather than just stay on the level of the symptom? And this is a collective bias that we have, right? Because the symptom is tangible, it's measurable. I can tell a foundation or a philanthropist or a corporate, I will feed 50 people tomorrow, and I can probably go out and do it, right? But if I say, I would like to have some funding to solve the problem of hunger in the city for the next 5 years, that's much harder to quantify and to have a success story and your KPIs, etc. around that, right? It's the harder piece of work, because most likely there's entrenched interests, there's systemic conditions that keep producing this result of hunger. So systems change is daring to ask that question, is daring to look below the surface and say, okay, very good. Many people are cleaning out the ocean, etc. Many people are feeding the hungry. Many people are doing these things. Let me have a look below the waterline. If we think of an iceberg model, which is a free tool that we can link in the show notes as well, that we've put out there. And you ask yourself, what are the rules, the laws, the processes, the structures that keep creating this outcome, this result that we think is so problematic? And one level deeper, you look at power and you say, well, who's deciding this rule or this structure, right? So who made this decision? Who said it had to be like this? Or who is fighting so that it doesn't change? Right? So for example, when we look at climate change and global warming, you pretty quickly see that we are like struggling to have a phase out of fossil fuels, which we all know is going to be necessary, right? Sooner or later. And then you see, oh, like at COP, how was it? Like 1 in 35 people was an oil lobbyist? Something insane like this, like, you know, and you're like, oh, like these people, this industry is fighting very, very hard for us to keep global warming going, basically, right? So that then you begin to notice these things, right? And you can maybe make different decisions or change your strategy, or realize that if you're just telling people to fly less, for example, which I do think collectively, especially those of us who fly a lot, we should fly less, don't get me wrong. But like maybe that's not the only thing we need to be doing. Maybe we need to hold the industry accountable for the like obfuscation it's been doing, for the fake studies it's been putting out, for the like interference in climate negotiations, right? Like all the stuff that's coming out now, we need to do that as well. So that would be, to me, like working with a systemic lens. And then systems change, if you are successful in that effort, would be that the paradigm upon which the whole system is built shifts. So the idea here is that our current system is based on foundational paradigms such as like extractive capitalism. So it doesn't matter like who suffers or the cost, the environmental cost, as long as it's good for the shareholders, it's good, right? And an unhappy person who consumes a lot, a very sick person, great for the GDP, right? This is the paradigm that we're in. It's also built on colonialism, right? It's fine to exploit people from other countries, etc. Probably they deserve it, whatever, some story like this. Or we're doing them a service to exploit them in this way. Anyways, all variations of this story, etc., right? Patriarchy and so on. So these are the foundational paradigms. And that results in a very linear economy. So we take something, we extract it from nature, we do something with it, we throw it away, it ends up on some kind of trash heap somewhere, out of sight for the privileged people. A paradigm shift would be, what if we were in a circular economy, in an economy that actually operates like nature, where there is no such thing as waste. There is nothing wasted in nature. A leaf that falls ends up being like the nutrients go down, etc., for the tree to grow again, right? So there is a circularity, an inherent circularity to nature. And the question would be, could our economy also follow such a principle? So that would be true systems change, if we are successful in shifting the whole paradigm, where there is no more single-use plastics, right, in the ocean, because we've designed that out of the system because our paradigm is different.
I'm curious to know from you, what are the top 1, 2, 3 misconceptions that you hear from people when you talk about system change?
So one big one is, oh, this means we have to change global systems. So often when I speak of systems change, people immediately think, also like we've been talking about, right? Like capitalism, the patriarchy, like very big global systems, the international trade system, etc. And they think, oh, that's the root cause. Like we need to change things at that level of scale. But the problem is, like, who are you going to call? Like who are the 15, 20 people you're going to call to transform global capitalism? Like that is a tall order, right? There's very few people in the world who could potentially do this, who have that level of power and influence. But typically, those are the people who are most interested in it staying the way that it is. So they're not going to do that, right? So you and I, if tomorrow we wanted to change the global economy, like who we're going to call? What are we going to do, right? So one big misconception is this idea that as soon as you say system, it means the hyper macro, like the super big scale stuff. But the reality is, like, capitalism and the patriarchy and all of that exists within our country too, within our city, within our organization, right? If I operate in a business or in an NGO, like those things will be alive there too. even more, like they are alive in our families. They are alive in us. And I think this is where we make the bridge back to the inner work as well, right? So for example, how could I possibly contribute to a future where everyone gets to be free no matter what gender they were assigned at birth if I constantly think, oh, I'm a woman, I shouldn't speak too loud, I shouldn't have an opinion, right? I cannot put my hand up in a meeting. Like if I keep perpetuating what the patriarchy taught me, how could I possibly bring into being a world that is more just? Right? Same for like colonialism or racism. Like if every person that received this message that like I am inferior because of the color of my skin, if they live their whole life according to this belief, how can they fight for justice? How can they create a world where everyone is free, right? It's impossible. There's this quote by Thomas D. Willite, I believe, that says, like, you cannot give what you do not have. Like a person first needs to have peace in themselves to bring peace into the world. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. So again, this is a tall order, right? And I'm not saying you have to be perfect and you have to be fully deconstructed before you do anything. That's not the spirit of this, right? But the spirit is to ask ourselves the question, to say, okay, what paradigm am I embodying with my actions? And one, for example, that I was embodying all the time was that of extractive capitalism. Like just in the way that I was treating myself, in the way that I was working, right? I was like trying to pave the way for a more just and regenerative future by exploiting myself to the point of my health breaking down and having a burnout, right? So anyway, so first misconception is people go way too large scale. And actually you can find a system, like the system is always nested within another system and they exist at every single level of scale. So you could potentially have a lot more impact if you tackled the paradigm that you're really wanting to focus on for first in your family, in your neighborhood, or maybe in your business, in your organization, or in your university where you study, right? Like there's so many opportunities. And I think I'm more interested at this point in time in profound change than in like very tiny change, but that is very large scale, because we've been doing that for decades and it's not really gotten us the result, right? But if you told me, hey, in the university where I study, we completely changed the paradigm, I would be so excited by that, because that is a case study. That is a story that we can tell, and maybe the next university then also transforms, etc., right? So I think transformation has a much higher chance to like spread bilaterally, like, you know, from university to university or from city to city, than it has if just you and I start on the very international level and don't get anywhere. So that's the first one. And the second one, I started speaking about it because it's very related. All these things are, as soon as you think systemically, everything's related to each other. It's this then over focusing on the system and kind of thinking, oh, well, the system needs to change. Like, so what if I don't know, eat meat every day and fly 5-10 times a year, whatever, like it's the systems that need to change. And the key thing here to understand is like, yes, of course, the systems need to change. You're not wrong. And it's true that in many cases, the people who benefited from the way things were have strategically put responsibility on the individual, right? So they kind of say, well, you should recycle, right? Rather than as an industry, let's maybe not use a material that is gonna like, you know, eventually pollute our whole bloodstream, etc., at scale that we have no idea like how to actually take care of, which we know, right? We know the plastics industry knew from the start that even recycling wasn't a viable like waste management system. They knew it wasn't going to work. Anyway, so it's true that in many cases there is too much blame put on the individual, too much pressure, but still we are not absolved of responsibility. Like where people get this one wrong, I think, is that we are the system too. Like the system is not some abstract like monster out there, some kind of evil octopus. Like it's also me who benefits from white supremacy. I am the system as well. And I may not be like actively persecuting people of color or like going out of my way to be, you know, exploitative. But like historically, like people like me, white people, for those who are not seeing the visual, I'm very white, like benefit, right, from the way things have been working. And I have been, and if I cannot acknowledge that, right, and if I cannot like take responsibility for it and do what I can within my lifetime to rectify this or to bring it in alignment with my values, same as like my consumption, etc., then I have given away all my power and my responsibility, right? I can like be, oh, it's out there. And that is a key, I think, misconception, that we need to realize that yes, systems need to change, but systems change when people change. And when people with a lot of influence change, that has even more ripple effects, right? Because then we can figure out what changes in the system to make to change even more, right? So it has like a positive change effect, but it does begin with us transforming ourselves and taking responsibility for how we show up in this world, the kind of future that we vote for every day, and the difference that we make every day. So I would say that's a very, very big misconception. And then maybe as a third one, like, it all sounds so incredibly complex, right? And it is. Like, an important learning, I think, in systems thinking is that we can never grasp the whole of it. Like, there will always be a degree of mystery because we cannot possibly have an objective, fully controllable view of whatever system we're looking at. We can have an approximation of understanding. We can learn to understand patterns that we're seeing. We can hear as many voices from the system as possible to inform our view, but we never have full control, right? And so I see kind of two mechanisms when faced with complexity. Like, some people try to control everything. They try to maximize the data, maximize everything so that maybe I can control it and I can bring the complexity back to a linear plan thing, right? That's one type of mistake in a way that then leads to very big consequences if you act in this way in systems. And the second one is people who get completely overwhelmed and kind of feel like, oh, okay, then I'd rather not do anything because it's so overwhelming, it's so complex. And in that, I mean, there's great models like the Kinefin model that helps us understand, what kind of situation are we in? Is it a complex situation actually, or is it complicated? Important distinction. Or is it a simple situation? Is it a chaotic situation? But there's also this model by Peter Senge, a complexity scientist from MIT, that's called the creative tension. And it's one of the models I come back to time and time again. It's very simple. On the one hand side, you have present reality the way that it is. And on the other hand side, you have the future potential. What could be, what we both know could be, our visions for the future. And the problem is, if you're only connected with present reality, that's where you get depressed, you get cynical, you think we can never change anything, we're doomed anyway, right? You kind of go into this dark place. And if you're only connected to the vision, you are in La La Land, right? You are not connected to reality at all. You're spaced out over there, unable to actually do anything and change anything because you are so in your dream world that doesn't correspond to what most people are experiencing. So we're change workers, people who want to make change, leaders, right? People who want to see transformation happen, they stand firmly between those two. And that's called the creative tension. There is a creative tension, a juicy tension between where we are and where we want to go, or where we know where we could go. And I think in operating in this way, in recognizing that when I am connected to these two things, I will feel a tension because I'm oh, we are not there yet, but we could be, but we're here, right? I'm kind of in this thing. But if I feel that stretch or that tension within me, that is where change happens. That is where magic can actually happen. And I find that to make progress in change, if I have an inner orientation to shifting paradigms, if I really am trying to live into a new future, new paradigm, if I stay focused on going step by step, the best that I can at every point in time, and I stay in this creative tension, that is one of the absolutely best recipes for change that I've ever come across. And it's not a massive strategy. It's none of that, right? It's just kind of almost like a guiding principle. If I do my best to embody it, if I have this orientation to paradigm shifts, I'm connected to both reality and future vision, and I take it step by step and I do the best that I can do, right? To really maximize the impact I can have, the sphere of influence that I have, to really fill that out. That is, to me, one of the best recipes for transformation out there. So sometimes we don't need to be paralyzed by complexity. We also don't need to try to control complexity. We can go step by step, and every step will give us information that we get to reflect on and integrate, that will transform us in turn, right? Because we're aligned with life. We're moving as life, trying to transform itself.
Thank you, Nora. So I put a short summary of the 3 misconceptions. So the 3 points is: people think about the large scale of system change, think about the very big things. And the second one is over focusing on the system and forgetting the responsibility we have and the inner change that we can start from within ourselves. And the third one is we will never have full control anyway. So um, it's enjoyable to find this creative tension as you describe it.
Mm-hmm.
Inner change versus system change. Many people see it as two different things, and you already talked about it. How important it is to have this mindset, because also if you only focus on the system change without knowing who you are and starting with your purpose and doing the inner work, you might get burned out, for example. So would you like to tell me, like, maybe also share some stories of people, how they transformed after being aware of these two?
For sure. Yeah, inner work in my experience is absolutely essential. And I first came across this principle, some of you may know Theory U. It's a theory of transformation that has been developed by the Presencing Institute, a very powerful one. And one of the things that they kept bringing in the foundational trainings that I did is this quote by Bill O'Brien that says something like, the impact of an action is defined by the inner condition of the intervener. So I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's the spirit of the quote, to say that where I'm coming from when I take a certain action will like determine the direction things take from there, right? Will contribute to shaping the impact. And when I first heard this, I was like, almost like, I don't understand, in the sense that I used to kind of think that, well, if I'm just doing the right action, right, the ethical action, it almost doesn't matter like why I'm doing it, because I'm just doing the right thing. Like, so why would we care where I'm coming from? And, you know, I was young, and I'm like, well, it's partially right. Like, of course, the action in itself matters. Like if I treat someone nicely, or if I, you know, for example, eat less meat or whatever, like that is a net positive, right? For sure. And where you are coming from and why you do it makes a difference. And the hard way that I learned this lesson is, we already briefly touched upon it, like my own trajectory with burnout, right? So at some point, I kind of had to see that the way that I was working and literally exhausting myself, like periodically, right? I would basically like come back from holidays and be like, this is great. I have full energy, go, go, go. And then maybe 5 months later, I would be again like at a breaking point, like lying completely flat for a month. And then again thinking like, now everything is going to be different, right? I hired a new person, whatever. I made some changes. It's going to be excellent. And then I would again land at the same place. And I had to recognize that, yes, there were systemic or contextual factors for that. Of course, the work that I was doing is incredibly hard. If you do systems change work, you have less funding and less support. Typically, we had team challenges. We had like a whole, you know, array of challenges. Of course, there's, you know, a part that goes there, but also I had to realize, like, why am I driven to work like this so much, to this extent, in this way? What's that, right? And when I started to dig, and this is, I think, you know, why I can have so much empathy also with people who are pursuing a linear trajectory, for example, in the private sector, and only later on realize like, oh, right, because I was in a trajectory where it wasn't that I was in a private company or whatever, but like it was that I was blind to what was really going on. It was that like I kept receiving signals and indications that maybe something isn't right, and I just couldn't look at it. For a long time, I was like, no, like I don't want to be still. I don't want to look at this. I need to keep going. I need to get this social enterprise to work. I need to get this impact delivered, because that is what matters. And what I then uncovered is I had really fully bought into the story that this is my worth. This is my worth. This is my, almost like my apology to the world for existing. It's like a part of me felt like I had no business existing as a person of such privilege. And I don't even mean like my parents aren't rich, you know, like we were lower middle class, but just by being born in Switzerland, just by being white, etc., like such a degree of privilege compared to the rest of the world. And my psyche couldn't reconcile this with the injustice that I was seeking, right? Like there was a part of me that like couldn't accept this. And my overworking was almost like, yeah, an apology. It was like, okay, maybe it will be okay to exist as who I am if I sacrifice myself for change, right? Like, and no, I mean, if already you can imagine psychologically, if it was hard for me to accept like my life the way that it is, to be who I am, imagine if I like would be happy. How dare I, right? Like, how dare I be happy? That is so unfair, right? That is unjust. And I was really like psychologically, of course, I didn't know this, right, explicitly at the time, but it was driving all my actions, this guilt, this weight, this wanting so much to contribute to change, that I was on a fast track to burnout, like every single time. And I really couldn't look at it. And I was fighting the symptoms in my own life. And that's where like the irony, right? Like I find that often the work that we do out in the world reflects what we actually went through, or what we would have needed when we were younger, or a lesson that we learned, or is just the teaching that we need to acquire right now. Because I was out there thinking about systems change and addressing the root causes, and you have to dig deeper. But in my own life, I was going to the spa for a day and calling that self-care and thinking I would be fine. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't able to dig deeper. I wasn't able to see those root causes until I really stopped everything, went to the burnout clinic, and then a process began of also really detaching my identity from this person who had created this organization, from the person who made that organization work, right? Like I couldn't let it fail. So yeah, that kind of kicked off a deep inner transformation. And you know, to share something that's really humbling, I don't mind like humbling myself a little bit if it helps other people. In 2019, I held a TEDx talk, a very like as kind of a spontaneous TEDx talk, but I called it the hidden variable of societal transformation. And I tried to talk about this inner work that's needed for the outer work, right? So I was already beginning to understand it and to like put words to it and to form concepts in my mind around it. But only 2 years later did I get the burnout diagnosis, and not just the burnout diagnosis. My psychiatrist told me that I was most likely chronically depressed, which means you were depressed already 3 years before. So I was holding a TEDx talk, trying to put words to this importance of this inner work while being burnt out and not knowing about it, right? So this just is a bit of a humbling example to show like how far cognitive dissonance can go, how far like the gap between knowing something on a rational level and actually embodying it can be. Because, and the key thing here is like, if we are invested in the status quo, change is so hard, right? Like if I'm invested, for example, in I make a lot of money from the system, if you tell me the system should change, I'll be like, hell no, right? But the same thing for me, like on a very personal level, like I was so invested in this identity and being this person, like my whole worth was wrapped up in it, right? So if you told me, Nora, maybe you should leave, maybe you should change the job, maybe you need rest. No, hell no, right? I couldn't take it. So yeah, so that was kind of my personal, you know, journey that then got me to spend a lot more time thinking about this, working on this, really doing also healing and inner work on myself, right, around that. But then I created this model called the transformation loop of inner and outer work. So indeed, it's like an infinity model. We can also link it in the show notes, to really make it explicit that on all levels, the inner work that we do drives the outer work. And then when we have done the outer work, that informs again, and we hopefully integrate the lessons into our inner work again. And the model includes the individual because obviously it starts with us, right? But it's also our teams, our organizations. For example, I see so many, you know, NGOs, they want to promote a culture of post-colonialism and anti-racism out into the world, and they have huge power dynamics inside. There's so many contradictions in so many places, right? Where we are struggling to live within what we actually want to promote without, like in the world. So that is kind of my take on this inner and outer world thing, is that this is super humbling. It's super hard when you start to really, really take it seriously. But to me, this is the path that we need to walk if we really want to have the impact out into the world that we wish.
I'm gonna mention 3 points that you talked about. First of all, be clear on your intentions. This is the most important thing. Like, why are you working on this? If you are if you are a change maker, if you call yourself a change maker, let's say, be clear on your intentions. The other one is accept who you are and not to be guilty because you want to chase something. Like, let's say, if I am a man, I don't have to be guilty if I wanna help women have the same equality, let's say. And if I am privileged for any other reason because I was raised in a country, I don't have to feel guilty that based on guilt, I want to help others. And that could be anything else, or we talk about age or many other things. The other one is this awareness, and I'm grateful that you were vulnerable to share it. That many times we want something, we know that it's right. We even have, because I think you're so passionate about it, and you know that it's something important, so you tell others about it. It's important to remember that if just by talking about it to others, being aware that I might not have fully lived it or embodied it. And that's also a message directly to me, because you reminded me of so many examples in my life. Let's talk about something else now, because it's also easy to forget. So while you are on this journey, of course, you achieved so many things. And I'm not going to talk about your achievements now, but I'm going to talk, how do you usually celebrate them?
That's another great question. Yeah, that's another thing that in the mode that I was in before, I not only could I not celebrate them, often I couldn't even see them. And this is kind of wild to say, right? But I would often tell like my partner or also my friends that like internally I felt like I failed because my goal was to change the system, right? Like my goal was so big, my vision was so big. And even though we had huge successes, right? And we're like, wow, you got this funding and you get to train these people in systems change. Like actually every little thing, if I would focus on this now, I'd be like, that was incredible. Like that was, for example, the first time in Switzerland that money was given for a systems change project, or that was a great success because it led to these people changing the trajectories of their lives, etc. Right? So now I can kind of see it, but at the time I was constantly in a deficit mindset. My goal was there, my reality was here. So no matter what looked like a success to anyone else, I felt like I had failed and I was continuously failing. And this was such a huge lesson to me. And this is maybe interesting or valuable for anyone who's listening to this and is thinking about, oh, maybe like, do I want to work on systems change? Is that something I would want to do? We do have a free like 2-hour kind of, masterclass that introduces more systems change in detail on different strategies. But if anyone is like, oh, like I'm kind of curious about this, one key thing to understand is that I didn't understand at the time is that what worked in other sectors is not going to work in this one. Like the logic that worked, for example, when you built your startup and you were really successful, or in my case, I was a very successful young leader, right? And I had operated in this NGO network and I was, a UNESCO young leader, and I was like going to these conferences and I was organizing them and I was raising a lot of money for them, and everything it was good, it was valuable, but it obviously was not like root cause work, right? So the system, the status quo, tolerates youth work because like, oh, well, what could it hurt? Let the young people talk among themselves. Let the young people do these things, right? I'm being a little bit mean with my old self, but like, I wasn't threatening to the status quo. Let's put it this way, right? Like it was easy for even corporates to give me a lot of money to do my youth work. And my modus operandi up to that point had always been, if I see a potential and people tell me it's impossible, I'll just go and do it. That was really how I functioned. Like I had gotten used to the fact that I could see potentials that other people couldn't see. That was the first thing. And then I could actually go out there and make it happen. This was what I was used to from myself. This was just who I was. And so I applied this same logic to the field of systems change. And I was like, here too, I see a huge potential of transforming all of Switzerland, all these systems with this story, and expecting myself to just go and make it happen. But the problem is that in systems change, like we've been discussing, you can never control the outcome linearly. So could I organize a big conference, even though I was very young and we got the president there and we got all this money and everyone said it was impossible, blah, blah? Yes, I could, because whether or not I succeed is mostly dependent on my skills and my motivation and the amount of like sweat sweat equity I'm willing to put into this, right? In systems change, it's not like that. the change depends on so many factors, on so many players, on so many boundary conditions. And until you're able to change something like a law, it may take you years to build your way up to changing that one law, right? Like sometimes it's a decade or longer that change movements need to build until we reach a tipping point, etc. And so I think I did myself a huge disservice from coming from that youth work into systems change work and trying to, right, like with the same logic, make it happen. So as a result, right, so that explains a little bit why I couldn't see my successes. I didn't feel like they were. I felt like they were just, maybe milestones on the way to a bigger goal, but I was still failing to reach that bigger goal. So that was a really, really humbling process. And now that I work with Paraíma, like on a more global scale, to support people who want to do systems change work or are already doing it, I operate very differently. I still have a big vision in my heart, right? So going back to Peter Singe's model of the creative tension, like I still am very connected to what I know could be. And I would love to see a systems change movement that is well resourced and where systems change leaders get to thrive and they feel belonging and they're celebrated, right? So like, and that it's really a recognized career. Like there's all these visions that I have for my field, right? But I'm not putting the pressure on myself to reach that tomorrow, or else I will have failed. Like instead, I'm focused on building one step at a time, almost like the road there. So I'm like having a very different mindset when it comes to progress. And now when, for example, I launch my first online course, the Change Work Compass, to have people find their unique contribution in a systems-informed way. So not necessarily that you have to do systems change, but that you can contribute to paradigm shifts if you want. The fact that I got to that point, I celebrated that. And, I don't remember exactly what I did. It's maybe 6 months back. But then when it sold out, I was so excited, And before I would have been like, oh, it's nothing, And I'm like, that is so exciting. Like, that means this resonates with people. And then I ran it again and it sold out again. And we just launched our fellowship for global systems change leaders across the world. And we have 16 amazing people working on very different things. And I celebrate that, right? And so, yeah, I think now, maybe as one example, like for the launch of Paraíma, I invited some of my friends at home to join me. And for everyone who's global, like not living close to me, I also kept a list. Like anyone who wrote to me to congratulate, anyone who engaged with what we did, I kept like a list of all of their names to like hold them present in my heart and in the celebration. And then we had great food, a beautiful cake. And my friend gifted me this apricot tree, a little tree, as a symbol for this new project and the growth of it. And then now I get to like follow this tree through the seasons. And it also reminds me that like things take time to bloom. Like the tree doesn't bloom all year round, right? It blooms two colors, one time and then the other time. And it doesn't bear fruit the whole year. So yeah, now I think I live and also celebrate my successes in a more cyclical way. I have much more appreciation.
Nora, what is the one thing that maybe changed the way you look at either system change, inner work, or even entrepreneurial innovation, for example, or social innovation during the last year?
During the last year, I was thinking about something that's a little bit earlier than that. But then I'll tell the story and then maybe something comes up from the last year as well. I think the biggest thing that also led to me doing Paraíma now is that someone asked me what would be the dream. And this is a question I now bring everywhere because I feel like so often, we're thinking, oh, here are my options and here's what I could do and I could do this or I could do that, right? Especially when choosing like different career options or like different pathways we could take. And we're like, I could do this, I could do that. And we start to weigh off the options of each other and have pros and cons lists. And I was in that mode when I left my NGO. And this amazing mentor and coach of mine said, well, I hear you. You have many options. What would be the dream? And then that was like the seed moment, because then suddenly my mind was able to say, well, actually, and then I started, developing the idea for Paraíma. And now it's a reality. So for me, that was such a transformative moment. And I think it's something I used to have. Like I used to have this visionary, right, quality, like we were talking about also in my youth work. And then I think I got burned a little bit by it, right? In my NGO for systems change in Switzerland, because my vision was so big. And so I think I was a bit afraid to dream again. And now I rediscovered that you can dream and you should have visions. It's just the relationship to the vision that needed to change in my case. But yeah, I think this question of what will be the dream? And a second big thing that for me changed also a lot of things that was in the last year was working with people who really are in their own power as well. Finding people, to partner with, to collaborate with, even to join a team who are very clear, like, this is my unique contribution and I love what I do. For example, I now work with someone who does like social media for Paraíba, and she's incredible and she's so good at it and she loves it. And, she really has this kind of clarity, like, this is me and this is what I do. And we have the values alignment. This is really important. Like, she only does this for projects that, ethically she wants to support. And same for like the people who've done my website. And we have an artist in residence from Brazil, Anna, who's incredible, etc. Right? So, but like I used to have many challenges in my team. And I think often like this kind of employee dynamic, like it was just very challenging for me. I think I'm a terrible manager. I shouldn't be. I never wanted to be. I never signed up for it. And now that I work with people who are very much like in their power and who have this value alignment, collaboration has been so fruitful and so like seamless. Of course, there's, challenges and things get forgotten, etc. But there is no more this conflictuous energy that used to be very present in my previous work.
What are your top 3 core values?
So to me, integrity is a very big one. Yeah, I would say that's a very big one. Justice and care, I think I would say, are my top 3 in terms of what I see myself also embody. And then I learned this in the Dalai Lama Fellowship, aspirational values. So values that are really important to me, but I'm more like learning to live into them. So for example, regeneration would be one of them, right? That of course, in my work, it's very present, but to treat myself with a regenerative approach is something I'm like continuously working on. I'm aspiring to it. Creativity, really expressing my creativity and living in this alive and creative way. That's also another one. Yeah. But I would say, integrity, justice, and care as like core solid values.
I'm really enjoying the discussion, Nora. And like we could talk much more about system change. Maybe also we can have another episode in the future if you're open to it. Now I'm
Absolutely.
curious to know from you, how do you see the future of work, and especially with the changes of AI influencing your work, system change, and how the world would be in the next decade, maybe?
That's a massive question, Omar. What do you think? Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely evolving, right? There's no question like about that. And things have been changing very rapidly, and I think it's thrown many people off, especially right people who were very hung up on this kind of linear concept that we've been sold. So all this disruption, what for me is kind of clear is that like things are changing and we cannot rely on the old scripts anymore. And so there is a huge opportunity, I think, for anyone who's either entering the workforce or at the point in time where they can reconsider like the direction they want to take in their life, to really, really focus on like what is really important to you. What really, do you want to be doing? What feels meaningful to you? What is important to you? What is true to you, and let that take some more space in the equation. Of course, you have to consider practical things, and some people may need to consider right living costs and visas, and there's many things to navigate, obviously, right? But given that the old scripts don't work anymore, it's time to factor in even more so, right? What is really important and meaningful and true to you. Because what I tend to observe is that when people know themselves, when there is a sense of self-awareness and when there is authenticity and they dare to be potentially vulnerable and show up as who they are, and they speak that into the world responds. And even just, like you and me in a conversation like this, like someone may hear something and say, oh, Nora, I really liked what you said and I want to work with you or whatever, right? So, and same for you, right? Wow, Omar, brilliant, how you do this. Like the world responds to how you show up. And so if you show up with clarity, right, with like who you are and what you would like to do or what you would like to see into the world, you start to like connect with people who are aligned with your values, who share your vision, who are maybe in the field that you want to join, or right. So you suddenly can have all these allies and this support to get to where you want to go. So this for me, it's not so much about like, how the whole world and the field of work is going to change, but how people navigate careers is evolving so much because again, this linear script is gone, right? So it's so much more about who you are. And people say personal branding. Okay, like you could call it personal branding if you want, right? But what it means to me, personal branding, is that you have a clear story of who you are. You know who you are. And you step out into the world with that clarity, daring to speak into existence what you wish could be or the trajectory you see for yourself. And that allows people to respond to you, even just like on LinkedIn or at a conference or how you introduce yourself. So I think the non-linearity and the emergence of it is going to increase so much more, as we cannot rely anymore on what used to work in the past. So this is just, I think, a great encouragement to like show up even more truthfully and even more boldly, because you never know like what comes your way when you do that. And the other thing that is kind of present with me is also that like these old structures we used to have around, you have to choose this sector or this sector or this sector, and then you end up with this hyper specialized people, right? Like academia, and then at some point you're the professor or like this, right? Like just all these pyramids that we used to know. I think that is also, I'm not saying it's not going to exist anymore. Like, I don't know what academia is going to look like in 10 years or the corporate ladder, but it's become much more fluid, right? Like in academia, they realized, oh, we need people who have practice experience, and they find ways to bring those people in, right? Like in the private sector, they realize, oh, well, maybe we need people who've done this on the ground in an NGO context. They bring them in, right? So there is much more a fluidity to move in between those sectors and potentially even to act in roles that we didn't even have a concept for. Like now you can be an influencer, like that was not a thing, right? Like just 10 years ago. But this is now kind of again, a capitalist example of how our attention is being captured and monetized. But in a similar way, like you could say the career that I have, I mean, does it even exist beyond the fact that I'm doing it, like, and in a similar way, I see so many people charting their own paths and allowing themselves to, again, be who they are, but also like work in this sector for a while, like operate there, potentially have an organization that holds a space that is collaborative amongst the sectors, right? What do you call that? In Cambridge, they call it social entrepreneurship. But like in our society, we don't yet have so many names, but there's labs and living labs and, right, innovation spaces, these kinds of things emerging everywhere. There's so much more fluidity and opportunity to move in between places and to allow ourselves to be multiple things. Because also, as long as we had the linear paths, the rigid boxes, like the pyramids, we kind of had to be this one thing. Like, I am this career person who does this and blah, blah. I am this academic who's perfect on all fronts. And like, you couldn't be anything else, because to be something else would mean potentially taking credit away and respect away from that thing. And so, for example, what if you also write poetry? And that's not something that you would think that like maybe, oh, like are my colleagues going to like ridicule me for it or whatever? And like, who knows, maybe the wrong people, right? But the right people are going to resonate and respond to you again, right? So allow ourselves to be multiple things. And I see now friends, for example, they work in agriculture, but they also have their music pathway, their project, and they also like work as a teacher with special needs kids, and just this allowance of multiplicity, which I think is beautiful, and it brings us closer to our humanity. And I mean, I don't want to, glorify the gig economy either, because we know that comes with a whole series of problems as well. But it's definitely going to be more up to us. And if the career tracks don't work anymore, if all the entry positions are cut because they're replacing them with AI and whatnot, like it's also going to be upon us to be creative And maybe it's an opportunity. Like, I do think our governments should take action, et cetera, right? So that's another part of the conversation. But as long as we think of the individual, sometimes when we lose the solid ground that we had, that is also the time where we can be the most creative, right? Like, they often say, like, after a shock or a crisis can also be when the most like creativity and innovation emerges. And in places where there's a lot of comfort, like in Switzerland, we are very comfortable, like people's needs are met, etc. It's not necessarily like, like innovation is often born out of necessity, as they say, right? So I do think that in the future, people who are creative, people who can make things happen, people who are able to like gather people around them and work with others in this collaborative way and just create something and test something, I think that is going to be huge. And our networks, our connections, our ability to work in collaborative ways in this ecosystem is also going to be essential. So if the big organizations, break down or don't employ us anymore or don't offer us any meaning, the alternative will be for us to form our own networks. But like, we probably don't want to just replicate what the big companies used to do. We want to do it differently, right? So there's going to be a lot of interesting work, I think, done around how do we collaborate in an ecosystemic way? And what does it mean, for example, to be a network of consultants, right? Who support each other, who share the revenue, but who are not like this rigid consulting company where everyone's employed and you have to get, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in terms of business models, organizational models as well. And it might be hard, but my hope is that, like the more we dare to follow what is true to us and the more we look out to find our people and to do things together, the more we can actually create the kind of organizations we wish existed and the kind of networks and with that, over time, the kind of world we wish existed.
Now, instead of being rigid, especially in the future, look for how you can create, first of all, and then how you can co-create and collaborate with others to create things and make things happen. And that by itself will bring synchronicities. You will find people who think the same way, who have the same mission. And of course, others might not be interested, but this will bring you to places you haven't thought of in the past. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I recently started doing it with my guests, and they like it, I like it, so I'm doing it with you. A question from my previous guest. So my previous guest has this question. He asked me to ask it to a future guest who is interested in such topics. And it is, why do people often do what they think will get approval from others instead of doing what they believe is right? Why do they follow the crowd instead of standing up for what they believe, even if it costs them comfort or recognition?
This ties in a lot to what we've been discussing. Very nice. Yeah, maybe in addition.
And by the way, I want to mention that the guest is David Cohen, so you will see also his.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I mean, belonging is essential for survival, right? Like, just on a very primitive biological level, like as a baby, as a child, like your survival depends on being accepted and included and belonging to the unit that takes care of you, whether that's your community, whether that's your family, right, your parent. So we do have a very strong need to belong, because for us, psychologically, like, belonging is tied to safety. And this is not the case anymore, right? If my community, like as an adult, if my community were to like exclude me, I would probably survive and be fine. But there is a part of my biology that hasn't like progressed as quickly as human society has, right? So there's a part of my biology that still thinks like, if I'm excluded from my community, if they reject me, like I will die in the wild, right? Like my survival is in question. And especially when we look at like how people react also around money topics, it's very often, so I don't want to get to like the neurobiology of it all, but right, like it's that part of the brain that is like fight, flight, right, mechanisms that like overrides our, more like deeper reasoning abilities, our empathy, all of those things. So because we perceive it to be tied to our survival. So I think that's kind of a context, right? Where again, I can have like so much empathy for people who don't step out and don't speak up and just follow the crowd and just do what they're told or do what they think everyone expects of them. And also, I don't know if you've made this experience, but I know that like in my life, I was punished for stepping out of line, right? I did have these experiences where if I spoke up in school and it was an uncomfortable question, I would get shut down, right? If I was too intelligent and I had too good grades, I would get made fun of in school, right? So if you dare to step out in many societies, and not in all, but especially in societies that are very like rigid and that have these school structures, right, that are very rigid, you do actually get kind of pushed down. And at least in the Swiss context, that is definitely a thing. We have a strong average bias, I think. Don't stand out too much, like don't be too, critical, don't be too whatever. So perhaps people who, as an adult, don't speak out so much also had such experiences, right? They learned at a young age that it's not safe. It's not safe to question your elders or like people of authority. It's not safe to shine or, be really yourself. It's easier, in fact, to make yourself smaller, to be quiet, to follow the flock, as they say. So I think those can be some like, personal journey reasons, a little bit systemic as well, because the system can influence this for sure. And then we have all the things that we talked about before, right? Like the narrative. Like if you never know anything else, and if you're ever only told, for example, that women were created by God to serve the man, etc., and that's all you were told, and everyone around you like models, this type of femininity, etc., and you never have any opportunity to see anything else or explore anything else, then most likely like you may just follow that again, because also leaving that community hypothetically has a very high cost and you have to like redefine everything for yourself in your life. And in a similar way, if your whole family is like a family of doctors or lawyers, and they put so much pressure on like you also becoming a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, right? Like, and you have to have this status and you have to belong. And maybe you see all your peers are buying like houses in a certain neighborhood. You also want a house in that neighborhood, etc. And you need the membership in this club and whatever, right? And like sooner than you know it, you suddenly have living expenses that are so incredibly high, right? That you don't even really enjoy, but you just kind of followed along. And then you're like, well, shit, now if I change jobs, even though I would be happier elsewhere, like, how am I going to pay for all of this, etc. Right? So I think there's like the pressure of the narrative and the pressure of like the sunk costs and the investments that you make in a certain status quo, as we were discussing before, that then makes it so incredibly hard to change and to deviate from that. And yeah, being a visionary and being courageous and really stepping out of line is not often rewarded, especially if you're the first in your context to speak up about something. And you may, in some cases, lose something, right? I think we're seeing things really, we've seen, to me, like the genocide in Palestine has been such a powerful example, because we've really seen the silencing tactics, we've seen the doxing campaigns, and that in the early days, like the people who spoke out and the first people to kind of call it a genocide, like those people were, right, harassed and attacked vehemently, and like campaigns were led to get them fired and so on. And the more you have experts speaking out, right, and saying it is a genocide, actually, according to our field of study, and the UN and Amnesty and all these respected institutions speak out, and the like collective tendency tends to change as we keep seeing all of these images and this evidence, right? Now, if you speak out and say it's a genocide, most likely you will be okay. Right? You may still have, especially in a context like Germany, like a couple of people who are unhappy with you. And I'm not saying it will be completely free of consequence or like think that I can guarantee that, but it's different now than it was 2 years ago. And so, yeah, I think that's also important to kind of understand, right? That they're always the people who move first, like in an innovation adoption curve as well, right? There's the first movers, the early majority, then the majority. And in the changing of public opinion, and what we call a moral revolution, there's also that curve. The first person to be against slavery must have had a really hard time, right? But the 10,000th person being against slavery, less so. So it's all just contextual information. At the end of the day, it's individual psychology, right? Why someone may or may not. But I would really say that if in your heart of hearts, you know that something is wrong and you know that you want to speak up, and the price that you will pay is not life-threatening, actually, then, right, it is worth doing. Like, because there's this quote that says, like, solidarity, like real solidarity has to cost you, like often costs something. And so I know that I've had speeches that I didn't end up doing because I dared being honest with the potential client, or, right, like things like that, like opportunities I refuse because I know it's not aligned. But what is the cost, really? In truth, it's okay, one opportunity less, but does it make a material, massive change in my life? No. So I'm not saying speak out if you're literally maybe going to be harassed and it's going to become dangerous for you. But if it's the matter of one client less, one award less, some criticism, I think we can handle it. Those of us who are safe enough, especially, should go first because we can really handle it.
There are many things that you reminded me of, and there are so many examples about how when you stand up for yourself and your values and just express who you are, many people might not like it and you could be excluded, as you were saying, but in the end, it's not really a loss as how I see it. And there is something else that you reminded me of. There was a financial advisor in a podcast saying that the top one financial skill that you have is not to buy things to impress other people. So it comes back to this. Now I'm curious to know from you.
That's such a good point.
I'm curious to know from you, Nora, what is the question that you've been reflecting on and you are curious to hear the answer from a future guest?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. Yeah, I really liked what you said just now, like around, right, that what is the price really? And in a way, the cost of inaction can also be like that we actually are included, but we don't really belong because we haven't found our real people. Right. So yeah, so that's such a beautiful thing. I have so many questions I would love to hear from people on. I mean, one thing would really be just to ask them, like, what is your real vision for the future? Like, if you really connect, like everything you're fighting for, you're working on, if that all came true, tell us the story of that future world. What does that future look like? The vision that you hold in your hearts of hearts. That's something I always love to hear from people what that is. I think it's such a great question.
I really like the question. Do you like to answer it yourself?
I can, yeah. And I've got a little help over the years because, of course, I lead visioning workshops sometimes, and there's this like guided meditation that's also part of the Change Work Compass to envision it. And I read a lot of fantasy books. It's one of the things that like helps me in a way think about our world without thinking about our world, right? Like, because you kind of are in a completely different universe, but you see the patterns because, right, you see things. So I really recommend a book by Becky Chambers called A Psalm for the Wild Built. And I don't want to spoil too much, but it's a short book. It's easy to read. It's nothing crazy, but it is like in a kind of a post-apocalyptic future, post the apocalypse. So it's how humans have rebuilt after, in a way, the apocalypse. And there's a moment in time where like everything was done by robots, right? So what we're seeing beginning now, like we have passed that future, like everything was done in robots in all of these factories. All these robots were kind of enslaved, and then suddenly they awoke. So there is an awakening of the robots that happened. And rather than wage war on humans or whatever, want revenge, they just asked to retreat to the forest and to never be bothered again. And then like, we don't know how much time passes. Maybe it's 100 years, maybe it's a couple hundred years later. It's the first contact between a human from that future civilization and the robot that comes out of the forest to ask, how have you been doing, humans, right? And then through that journey, you discover that future human society as well. And so, for example, when they come of age, they get one device, like you could imagine, like a phone, a smartphone. They get one device, and that is the device you have for your whole life. And there is like a 3D printer and a local repair shop in every community. And if something breaks down on your device, you can go there and you can get it repaired. But this idea, right, that you have just one, because why would you need more? And it always works, and it always does what you need it to do. And you have access to all of this knowledge within it, and all of your contacts, your messages, etc. But it's just one device. Why would you need a new one every time? So that's just one concept, right? And the other thing that I really like appreciate seeing is like this. I don't know if you've ever heard of solar punk futures. It's something you can Google or Ecosia or research. You will see like solar punk refers to a future where we have found a way to live in harmony with nature, integrating technology. So it is not saying like we should go back to just have fire, wood fire and whatever. Like it's actually including like solar panels and right. So it is including technology. And it is technology that is in harmony with nature. And so very often if you look up solar punk images, like it's like a city that is in a forest, right? And like there are houses in the trees, and there's all of like this technology that makes it work. Or it's just like in general, these dwellings and these cities that are very integrated with nature. So I think to me, that's one of the main things that I'm kind of inspired by, is like to imagine us living much closer to nature in general, without this being a discomfort. I don't envision us camping in the forest every day, right? Although for fun we may. But like I really envision these dwellings where actually life is comfortable. And very importantly, we are connected to nature, we are connected to each other. So I envision communities where people know each other, people say hi on the street. As we know, that's a huge thing in happiness, right? How much belonging and how good relationships we have. And in terms of like how we meet everyone's needs, in my vision for the future, we have devised an economy where you can either commit to something that is system critical. Like, for example, your calling is to be a farmer, and then that is the main thing that you do, and that is how you contribute to the collective, or a doctor or whatever. Or you may choose something else that is like still essential, but not as like critical. For example, if I really want to be an artist, and then we spread out amongst all of us the chores, like the things that just need doing, that nobody has a calling for, or that, for example, when the harvest comes around, everyone goes and helps. The whole community has like a celebration around the harvest, those who can go, right? But did you see what I mean? So like there's an opportunity to pursue your calling, because often we have this like dichotomy under capitalism. It's like, well, if everyone would just pursue their calling, like who would pick up the trash and who would like clean, the places, and who would do these things? And yeah, so there's a whole like confusion, right, in capitalism around this. And I was like, well, if we were living in a community where we all knew what the collective needs are, we would find a way for people to follow their calling and contribute in such a way to the shared responsibility so that everyone's needs are met. So in that hypothetical future, like in the Psalm for the Wild Build in this book, they don't really have money. Like they do send each other via their device. Like they send each other like almost like a token of appreciation, but like you don't have to, pay me for this. It's more like they just share it with each other because they want to. So anyway, so I just see like so many more opportunities beyond what we were told this is how it has to be, right? I don't believe at all that like there is no way to meet the needs of the people on the planet. There absolutely is. Some people just, need to not have 15 yachts, etc. Right? So I think in my vision for the future, we live again in communities, and we can live very comfortably, very happily, pursue our hobbies, pursue our callings, make decisions together, but because we have found, again, this belonging. Because if everything is abstract and you don't belong anywhere, right, and everything's privatized, of course you cannot take collective responsibility. There's so much that could be said, but I think, yeah, that is just the essence of it. And you can do this guided meditation. Like we can also maybe share it, but like if you imagine yourself like walking in nature in a place where you really feel happy and safe, maybe it's a forest that or close to a lake or the ocean or whatever, and then you imagine like you're seeing, nature, and then at some point you come upon a human dwelling, and what does it look like? And like, if you can really allow your mind to kind of go wild, like it's not gonna look like what we know now, right? So like, what does it look like? And just let your subconscious kind of generate different crazy images of what this could possibly look like, depending on, right, the topography and the ecology of the space. I find that it generates very beautiful images, and almost everyone, then you can imagine you meet someone, you meet a neighbor that's also part of your community. Who is it? What do you talk about? And then you go do some work. What work do you do? Right? Are you paid for it, or like, how does it work? And you can kind of like build your own picture of what this, vision or future world could actually look like. And it's very beautiful. And almost everyone weaves in more presence, more beingness, less doing, more being. Things have degrown a bit in the future so that we can be in pace again with actually where real life is.
No, I'm really grateful. I wanted to say this in the end. Grateful for the conversation with you, and grateful for the diversity of topics that I really enjoyed it. Like it's a podcast. I think if when I listen to it myself, I think I'm gonna think about so many things, but in the end, they are all interconnected in a way. So we talked about purpose. We talked about what you said about creative tension, for example, the disconnection that we have in the world, burnout, seeing things from different perspectives. Of course, we talked about system change, our values, and we talked about our vision. We talked about inclusion. Now, what is your either call to action or final thoughts that you'd like to share?
So to me, when we speak in this way, right, when we really explore and we are very honest about it, and we have this systemic lens also as we have these conversations, it is very normal to end a conversation or a workshop that I give with more questions than answers. And that is a good thing. So if, the person listening is like, wow, like I'm kind of confused, like this was a lot, or like I have so many questions now, like that's great, right? Because I find that part of the problem with where we are is that so many people sell us easy answers, cookie cutter, silver bullets answers, and offer often, well, it can't be, right? Like there's no such thing as a cookie cutter answer when it comes to complexity or to systems, or there is no such thing as a silver bullet when it comes to like you and who you are, because you are unique, right? In a way, we're all the same. In a way, we're all unique. So kind of that degree of nuance and complexity tends to leave people a little, woo, where am I now after this conversation, or with questions? And if that's the case, that is a good thing. That is a positive, because that means that we didn't just offer another linear path to follow, but we offered reflections and we offered good questions to ask oneself. And so maybe my call to action would be, to maybe reflect at the end of this conversation, like, what is one thing that I want to explore further? Like, what is one topic that challenged me a bit, or that stays with me for some reason and I don't know yet why, or that like moved something in me, or that I really felt like, oh yeah, this is a great question, like whatever, like anything from this that you feel like, a part of me feels called to explore that further, and then actually do that. Because that is the most important thing, right? It's taking it back within ourselves and check in with ourselves and be like, okay, based on my own journey, where I'm at right now, like what is helping me move forward? What is helping me take that next step towards more integrity, authenticity, happiness, joy, whatever the goal is, right? Regeneration, and kind of trust that inner knowing. So that would be the call to action. Like whatever stays with you as a question, as a confusion, as an interrogation, as a topic, like sense into that, maybe write it down and commit to exploring it a little further. And if you'd like to, DM me, you're welcome to do so. We can have a chat. My DMs are open. If there's anything we can do to support, right, from our side, like with the free systems change masterclass, for example, or whatever, like you're super welcome to take any of these. But yeah, it might just be a conversation with your partner, or a book you want to read, or a research you want to do, right? It could be anything. So yeah, follow that curiosity.
One last thing you reminded me of is not to see confusion as something bad. but sometimes it's the starting point for you to be curious and to get more clarity. So thank you very much, Nora. I don't have any more questions.
Absolutely.
I'm grateful to have you on the podcast, and yeah, wish you all the best and all the joy.
Thank you so much, Omar. Thank you for this beautiful conversation and your very thoughtful question. I appreciate it.
Congratulations for listening until the end. You are in the top 25% of listeners. Studies show that we forget up to 70% of what we hear within 24 hours. But when we repeat an insight by sharing it with someone, commenting, or journaling it, it moves into long-term memory. So now tell me, what are your 1 to 3 takeaways you're keeping from this conversation? Enjoy every moment. Until next time.